It's kind of going back to what we talked about previously. It's when we were talking a little bit earlier about maturity, knowing who you are, your role, and having a positive influence in the community. I wanted to do a brief interview with Chris. So welcome, Chris. Chris Leonard is the BU leader for Agronomix, which is sells a product called Genomics globally to in the seed research space. And I got to know Dieter probably in 2017. And I won't read, I'm assuming you guys are reading this, but Dieter written multiple books, heavily involved in the community, ran a business globally, gave back to the community, and I had the privilege of attending Dieter's funeral. He was the owner of the business, and listening to person after person either get up and talk about Dieter, his humility, and how much he gave. I thought, well, here's a life worth talking about at Cultura, because it's I think leadership ultimately is a life of service, and most entrepreneurs that we talk with and businesses we talk with that are 20 plus years old, they weren't founded by private equity or venture capital. They weren't founded to make money. They were founded to give back. They saw an opportunity to make a difference in the world, and they turned it into a business that lasted a lifetime for them. That was certainly true with Jose and Shelley at Ag Vision, with the owners of Cal Software, the first investment that we ever made, and that was certainly true with Dieter. So Chris, I'm going to ask you a few questions about Dieter, and this is. Yes, I want to honor Dieter, but I hope this maybe inspires a few of you to think about your role. I was challenged recently in 2025 that said, hey, the new year starts and we all put down goals, financial goals, weight loss goals, exercise goals, and the new year is time to do that. And the challenge was, don't do a goal in 2025. Figure out your why. Why are you here? Because when they read your epitaph, nobody will read your epitaph and talk about how much you weighed, or how much you bench pressed, or the number of homes that you own. Right? The epitaph, and anyway, so I'll stop. Now I'm sounding like I'm preaching, and I apologize. But anyway, all right, Chris, you've known Dieter for a long time. What was the why did Dieter start Agronomix? What was the reason? Do you know?
Yeah, he never really intended to start a company. He created the software when he was working as a breeder in Morocco, I think it was originally. He'd worked in Syria and he'd done some computer work. He was working for the USDA at the time, United States Department of Agriculture, in Syria and then Morocco. And in Morocco, he created a software program to help him manage and analyze his data. And that program came to a conclusion. The USDA stopped the research, and Dieter was on a plane to a seed conference, and he got talking to the guy next to him. Well, it turned out the guy was going to the same conference. The guy said to him, "That seems like a good idea, what you did, creating your own software. Why don't you start a company?" And he'd never had the idea himself, but that's so he took the software that he developed for his own research, reworked it, and commercialized it, and created Agronomix Software to sell that software into the industry.
Yeah, that was fun. So if Dieter was sitting here today and I said, Dieter, who are you? How would he answer that question? Do you have an idea about? By the way, this wasn't on the list of questions that we sent you, Chris.
He would probably sit there for quite a while and think about it, because whenever he was asked a question, especially if it was a deep question, he'd always have a good think before he gave an answer. Which for an extrovert was rare, because sometimes he would say a lot of things and then circle round until he came to an answer. He was many things. He had qualified as a reverend. He had a PhD in plant breeding. He was happy to be in front of people. He was well known in the industry. But I think his probably proudest thing was being a father, grandfather, and he was very proud of Agronomix. And he was the father of Agronomix. My wife and I joke that that Dee's had two children, even though she's an only child. That Agronomix was her little brother, and because he spent a lot of time with it, and he spent a lot of time with the staff, nurturing them. When he passed away, and we had a sit down with all the staff, one of the things that several people said was that he was like a father or a grandfather, depending on what generation they were in, to them. So he wasn't just the things that you could write down. He'd take time with everybody in the office. He'd go and sit down with them, and he'd build those relationships. And when he had been away to a trade show or to a training course, he was always excited. He came back wanting to talk about it. And if you were the last one on his list, because he would work around the office telling the story to everybody. He had no particular order, but he would go into one person's office and tell them the story. But if you were the last one, you'd heard that story 8, 10 times by the time he got to you. But he still had that excitement and that passion about the industry, about the breeders that he'd met, about the things that we could do with the software.
Yeah, that's fun. I remember the first time I met him. So we had a new, for those that don't know, the folks that work in M&A, we call them business development people, BDs for short. And Tony was working for me at the time, and he said, "Hey, I talked to this guy up in Winnipeg, and he's thinking about retiring. He's not sure." Like, well, let's go meet him. We just set up dinner, and so probably the first time I met you too, Chris.
It was, yeah.
And so we set up a little conference room in a hotel. I didn't want to do it at the office for obvious reasons, right? It's so we got into Winnipeg late at night. We stayed at the hotel airport, and Dieter and his wife Ellen came, and Chris and his wife came. I think you're even your little did your child come with, if I remember?
Yeah, he was about 6 months old, I think, at the time,
Yeah,
maybe less.
yeah. Yeah, I remember that. And meet Dieter for the first time. Now, sometimes you get the title president, you get a little bit of an ego, right? And I'm as human and guilty as anybody. So I go walking in. Dieter walked right past me, went right to Tony, shook his hand, gave him an autographed book, and asked him how his children were doing. That was Dieter. Anyway, all right. Enough of that. I'm going to start getting emotional. So Dieter's life. Do you and maybe this is an unfair question, but how do you see Dieter's life impacting the future of agronomics? What do you think the biggest impact will be, Chris, other than just starting it? Because he's not here anymore, right?
I think there's multiple parts of his legacy that live on in each one of us that are at Agronomix, and certainly those that he was with for a long time. And that's not to say that those who are newer with us have any less experience with him, because he was just one of those people that was present. But he was starting to wind down to retirement. He was spending more time at home. But legacy is such a word that gets bandied around so much.
Yeah.
But I think in his case, it's a powerful testament when your staff think of you as a grandfather or a father figure.
Yeah.
And then for the software, he had a view that if you build it, they will come, which is not a Valaris view.
Yeah.
And I think we'd reached the point that we couldn't really take it any further. But Um, our top two clients came to us because of connections to Dieter,
Hmm.
and it wasn't initially about the software. They knew of the software, but it was him. It was um, the top client when we found out that they were going to put out a tender for their project. Um, they called Dieter up and said, "We're putting this out. We want to make sure that you're gonna put in a bid." And it was a surprise to him as much as it was to anybody else. I mean, it was like you um like you said, um, it's that humility. He was proud to do that. He was, yes, let's talk. Um, but also the other top client that we have, they'd used this, or their research director had used the software elsewhere in the world, and he said, "Look, we're not happy with the software we've got, but before we go and talk to them a bit more, can you give us a demo?" And Dieter says, "Yes, I'll drive across." They're here in France, and he said, "Yeah, I'll come across." And they're, "Oh, you'll come?" Like, "Yeah, we'll come." And they were so surprised that we were willing to drive across France, 4 hour drive, it's not far, to go and see them. And then when we got there and had the conversation, it was like he'd never met the guy face to face before, but it was like two old friends just connecting. And I think
Yeah.
that was something that he brought to the industry. I remember being at Astor Trade Show, and we were in the same location in Chicago, at the Hyatt Regency there for 25 years, always next to Midco. And everybody that had been in there for years would come by and say, "Oh, hi Dieter, how you doing?" And it was just countless number of people that he had connections with. And he turns to me and go, "Yeah, I know this person." And then it's like, I've forgotten their name. And then the name would just come to them. And then he'd just tell me a whole story about the first time he met them and um, the conversations that they'd had. He had a brilliant memory for people and places. And I think the fact that he could do that was something that helped him build his place in the industry.
Yeah, yeah. Well, good guy. So I hope that was okay for the rest of you because I think 40 plus years in an industry, creating the leading software package in a very niche vertical, friends globally, it felt worth spending just a few minutes honoring the man and the legacy. So thank you for that, Chris.
Thank you.
Anyway, yeah, you bet.